We may come to understand some things that we did not understand before. We may draw conclusions that we never knew were there. I'm reminded of, and although I don't agree with his view on justification by faith, let me think on it. Everything was going so well until then. I'll think of it in just a second. The new perspective on Paul is, I'll tell you in a minute. He's a first century historian. Reminds me of Dr. Tomlinson when I went to Midwestern Seminary. When I went to Midwestern Seminary, Dr. Alan Tomlinson was my professor. And Dr. Tomlinson, in his library, he had binder after binder after binder after binder. And those binders were full of first century writings. And so he read these first century writings. There were legal documents and things people had scratched on walls and all sorts of agreements and stories. He was able to pick up on particular phrases and sayings and ways that people spoke in the first century that maybe they didn't today. And when he read the New Testament in the Greek, he would then see things that no one else would read. Got that? So when N.T. Wright, that's his name, when N.T. Wright, trumpet sounds, and those who are in Christ will meet him in the air, that Jesus is descending, the trumpet sounds, and those who are in Christ will meet him in the air. But N.T. Wright has this conclusion. He says, if you picture a story like this, if I told you that one of your most beloved relatives who's passed away was here today, and you hear them honking the horn outside, what would you do? If someone said, she's here, she just pulled in, you know what I would do? In the middle of a sermon, I don't even know that I would shut my microphone off. I would sprint to go meet her. And in the first century, when kings would come, the horn would sound. Of whatever province or region there may be, those who were in the castle, if you can picture that. You know what they would do when the king would be seen from a distance? As soon as you could see the king, the horn would sound. And do you know what his people would do, the king's people? They would run out. They would greet the king as he was making his grand and glorious entrance. Does that make sense? So what N.T. Wright concludes when he writes about the trumpet that sounds and the dead in Christ, or those in Christ that go to meet him in the air as he's descending, like we begin to wrestle with this question, does Jesus start descending, or does Jesus just keep on coming down to the earth? Does that make sense? The horn sounds and maybe we meet him in the air, and maybe that's not when the rapture happens. Maybe we just go to meet him there. That is a biblical conclusion that N.T. Wright, I'm not saying that you have to agree with it, but he draws his, and all of the Bible are really, we're right after whoever it is, right after every bit of it. House that was disciples for them, and they're adoring buildings. Can you picture that? See all